Welcome to Look Around Florida. This is Michael Hardy. Yeah, that way. This gets the disclaimer out of the way. That way I don't get a phone call later, which which has not happened yet, but you never know.
I can arrange
Alrighty.
that.
Well, as long as it's not Calvin or Jason, I'm fine. Hey, Jeffro, welcome. See, Jeffro's on YouTube. Hey, buddy. Hopefully everybody else comes around. Welcome to Look Around Florida. We got Michael Hardy with us. Uh, some good things coming up. First of all, our division commander, Calvin Hart, wants me to let you know, start registering for the division reunion. He has a special gift for all of us. So pre-register, get it in ASAP. That note, got a message from our chairman of Flags Across Florida, Jeff Cotton. Uh, if you guys have any tethered or worn out flags, please bring them to Division Reunion. The Kirby Smith Camp is going to do a collection of the worn out tethered flags, battle flags. It can even be a U.S. flag. Polyester, cotton, nylon, it don't matter. And they're going to retire them for us. Hey, Linda and Roy, sorry about last weekend, but yeah, they will retire those flags for us. I know I have a lot, and if you got quite a bit and you want to retire them the proper way, please bring them to Division Reunion. A couple cool events coming up. Got a message this weekend by our Northwest Lieutenant Commander Daryl Rattree. The next couple of weeks shows a busy schedule for the Dixie Defenders Camp, 1861, and various SCV camps and mechanized cavalry. I invite you to join us if you are possible and can. It'll be both education and a great time. For Southern compatriots, please consider and support the SCV camps during these functions. First of all, I'm probably going to go up to this event for one day. If you're a reenactor in Florida, I know Michael was. This event took place in Brooksville. The raid of Otter Springs. I saw the pictures last year. It looked like a fun event. This is hosted by John Hensey Quincy Camp 770 out of Trenton, Florida. It will be held this weekend, 13th, 14th, and 15th at Otter Springs Park. The benefits the Camp Valor Project for Veterans. Yeah, at Otter Springs, numerous vendors, several war between the states, reenactment during the time frame. If you want more information on that event, you can check out FloridaReenactorOnline.com or Camp 1861. The Dixie Defenders will have any information and reenactment booths set up for the event. So hats off to them. The next event will be held at, instead of me looking away from the screen, let me move this over to my other screen where my camera's at. The next event will be held at 1 p.m. on January 19th. Most of us will meet at the Mexican restaurant on US 129 in Trent at 11:30 beforehand. We'll be holding a headstone cleaning class at the Midway Church Christ Cemetery located west, located west on US 129. So if you need your certification, you need to finish your hours, you got to be near Trenton, please hit Daryl Rattray up. The cemetery is 2 3/4 mile down County Road 233 on the right. If you should wish to obtain your SCV cert certification on headstone cleaning, this is a great opportunity. Yeah. Wait, I lost my train of thought. Opportunity as will be Mr. Don Sweet, state instructor from Medicine State Stark Perry Camp 1424, teaching the course. This will be held at this will be hands-on type class. It will be tie into the next listed event. This is a great way to get your required hours in, like I was saying. On January 21st, at 1 p.m., we'll be conducting a footstone dedication for a Confederate veteran, Solomon D. McKeel, in the Midway Church of Christ Cemetery at 550 County Road 232 between Bell and Trenton. We will be teaming with the great-great-grandson, Larry McKeel. I know I'm butchered that, so who is a member of the SCV Camp 2226, Lieutenant Axel Cameron Camp from Dallas, Texas. Ooh. He is also a member of the Mechanized Cavalry, Texas Division, 1st Battalion, Company C. It should be noted that Solomon served 1861 to 1865 in Company F, 2nd Florida Cavalry. Will also pay honor and tribute to Captain E, who is buried close by. Sir, Captain Lanner served in the CSA Clinton Light Artillery of Georgia. If you want further information on that, you can get a hold of Daryl Rattray. He's our lieutenant commander for the Northwest. Wait, sorry. Lieutenant commander for the Central Region of Florida. Woohoo! I made a couple mistakes there, but that's that's the thing about going live. So, a lot of cool events coming up. Hey, if you're going to be near the Everglades, last Saturday this month, come to Naples, Florida. We're going to be, my camp will be in the Swamp Buggy Parade in Naples, Florida not this Saturday, last Saturday of the month. If you want more information on that, poke me. I'll get it to you. Date, for the time where we're going to meet up and all that. So, looking forward to that. Also looking forward to next month, Everglades Seafood Festival. If you go home hungry from that event, there's something wrong with you. All right. Like I said, our guest tonight is Michael Hardy. Me and Michael met several years ago through his dad, reenacting here in Florida. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, yeah, I actually was born in Florida and grew up in Florida, and participated in my first reenactment in Florida back in November of 1982. My uncle came and picked me up and took me to this reenactment on the edge of the Ocala National Forest, and bought me a hat and bought me a jacket, and I got to carry the flag, and I went home and told my dad that was the coolest thing I had ever done in my entire life. and we started reenacting. And I grew up reenacting, and used to go to all the events in Florida. And we eventually built a company and a battalion and a brigade, and I commanded the 1st Battalion in the brigade. And in 1995, I got married and moved to North Carolina. And we still came back ever so often for events for a long time, but then kids came, and those fast weekend trips, it got harder and harder to do. We would jump in the car on Thursday night, or the truck on Thursday night, and drive to Florida and go to some reenactment like Brooksville or Fort Clinch, and spend the weekend, and Monday morning get up and drive back to North Carolina. And I just can't do that much anymore. I'm not as young as I once was. Out and about. But it's that time that I spent in Florida reenacting that really ignited, for lack of a better word, ignited my passion for Confederate history. History in general, there are a lot of things in history that I love to read about, love to do. But it's really the 1850s and 1860s that have captivated. That's not even the right word. Obsessed is not even the right word either. So whatever level is beyond obsessed, that's where I'm at. And been writing for about 27 years, 26 years, and write a lot of North Carolina stuff, but that's just because of where I live. I would love to have the wherewithal to just travel about and research even some of the topics that we're going to talk about tonight, some of the regiments we're going to talk about tonight. On one hand, it's not hard, and on the other hand, it is difficult. I often say that if you research a battle, writing about a battle is a lot easier than writing about a regiment, because you can go, Sean, you and I can go to Olustee and walk around Olustee and get our maps and other books, and we can become masters of the field at Olustee.
Yeah.
That's not that hard. But when you write about a regiment, that's a little more difficult, because you have to go and be masters of a lot of battlefields, and you have to be masters of all of the things like how a regiment worked or didn't work, and all of those parts, from the medical field to the criminal justice system within a regiment, military discipline, and the religious aspects of the regiment, and the logistics and supply aspects of a regiment. So to write a regimental history, you got to dig pretty deep. To write a regimental history and do good, and to bring new things to the table, you got to dig pretty deep. It is more than just putting together a roster and copying a bunch of stuff out of the ORs, the official records. It's a lot more difficult than that. So I think, Sean, you wanted to talk a little bit about Florida regiments tonight.
Yes, sir.
Army of Tennessee stuff. I have here on my magic desk a copy of Joseph H. Croots' Units in the Confederate Army. Now, this is not a perfect book. There are a lot of regiments that kind of get left out, but he has, and this is an older book, he has in his Florida section, he has 23 regiments and battalions out of the state of Florida that were organized for the Confederacy during the war. 23. Now, this does not include your militia, and every county should have a militia regiment prior to the war. I know the governor of Florida tried to reorganize the militia in 1858. To what degree he was successful, I've never seen that. I would love to see that, but I know a lot of states tried to reorganize their militia, especially after John Brown's raid, with the way that the fanatics in the North thought that was a good idea. John Brown's raid there in Harper's Ferry. That really was a wake-up call to the South, and the South started to reorganize their militias to different that was viable to different degrees, successful to different degrees. But your militia regiments and companies in various counties, if you were a male between the ages of, we'll say, and it changes and each state is different, but we'll say between like 17 and 40, you would have been required to do militia duty. Or service, and it's not much. You show up like once every 6 months or once a year for drill or once a quarter for drill, and there are company drills and regimental drills. But that is really the backbone as we get into our Confederate regiments as we move along. A lot of times we want to say that these men were green and inexperienced, and that's partially true, considering as we look ahead to the battles they fought, nobody was prepared for that, North or South. But they had some little idea about what it was like to be in a company and to be in a regiment. There was some idea about what's going on with that. So the war comes. I think yesterday was Secession Day in Florida, right? Was it yesterday?
Yesterday or today?
Yesterday or today?
Yep.
I don't remember now, but so the war comes, and all these different southern states, the deep South states, start to leave the Union. South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, they leave the Union. And they start to organize companies, and these companies, and the way, and this is kind of a broad statement, but the way it would work is, I've decided I'm an important man in my community. I'm a business owner or a lawyer or whatever, and I decide, hey, I'm going to raise a company. So I write the governor, and I say, hey, I'd like permission to raise a company. And the governor would pass that letter on with his approval to the attorney general, and the attorney general would say, hey, I think that's a good idea, and he would write me a letter back. And then, since most places in the South didn't have newspapers to advertise, I would start getting the word out. Hey, I'm raising a company. Hey, Sean, you want to join my company? And we would probably have some meeting someplace, and we would all agree to serve in this company. And once I had the required amount of men, we'll say 100 because the numbers vary from time to time. But once I had 100 men that had enlisted in my company, I would write the governor back and say, hey, I've got my men together and we are tendering our services to the state. And I'm sorry, I said earlier, attorney general would be the adjutant general. The adjutant general would write back and say, okay, you're accepted, and wait for orders. And they would eventually, orders would come out and tell me to take my company to wherever, to a training camp, wherever. And once we got 10 companies together in that training camp, we would constitute a regiment, and that regiment would be, the company officers would get together and elect a colonel and a lieutenant colonel and a major. And the colonel would appoint the other positions like your color sergeant or ensign, surgeon, chaplain, adjutant. Those other positions were all appointed by the colonel of the regiment. So that happens all over the South. Actually, it happens in the North too, but we're just going to talk about the South. That happens all over the South. And there are hundreds of regiments that are raised all across the South. And once that regiment is organized, we report to the governor through the adjutant general, and we just hang out until there's a need. And when that need comes, off we go to wherever it is we've been ordered. It's usually at that point in time that we're sworn into Confederate service. Prior to that, we would have been in state service, but we're sworn into Confederate service, and we are ordered to go someplace and do something. And in the Army of Tennessee, I kind of went through and made a list because there's no way I can remember all of this. But I kind of went through and made a list, and looking at various battles that are in what we consider the Western theater of the war. And the Eastern theater of the war is really easy to define. It's Petersburg, Virginia, and north. And it's west toward the mountains, the Shenandoah Valley. It's that really tiny geographical area. The Western theater of the war is from Kentucky to Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, sometimes Mississippi. It's Louisiana, not really that much Louisiana, but Alabama. It's a great big swath of space that makes up the Army of Tennessee. What becomes the Army of Tennessee, the Department of Tennessee. And so I just kind of picked a few important events and looked at what Florida-related companies and regiments were there. Now, there is a book on the Florida Brigade in the East, and there is a book on the Florida Brigade in the West, and there is a book called Far, Far From Home, which is a history of the 9th Florida. But to my knowledge, those are the only Florida regimental books out there. If there's another one, y'all pop in the comments and let me know, because I want to add it to my library. But Florida, in that aspect, is not really getting written about a whole lot, which is unfortunate, because most of us connect to those regiments. As Sean, you and I have talked about, I had an ancestor that wound up in the 11th Florida. And it's not the brigade that I'm connected to. It's to the 11th Regiment, 11th Florida Infantry, that I'm connected to. So it's unfortunate there are not more histories out there about some of these groups that came out of the state. But let's talk about a few of them. Army of Kentucky, Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, fought in 1862. And I found it interesting that commander is E. Kirby Smith, which, of course, has a lot of Florida connections. He, as his escort, has companies A, E, and F of the 1st Florida Cavalry during that campaign. The only other Florida-related group that I could find at the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, is the Marion Light Artillery that was in Claiborne's division. And interestingly enough, the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky is one of the most complete Confederate victories of the war. The Federals made 3 different stands, and the Confederates ran all of the Federals off from every one of those positions. And it was one of the most complete victories of the war for the Confederate side. There were several members of the Marion Light Artillery that were killed, and I have actually been to their graves. They are buried on the edge of the battlefield. But I would argue that the Marion Light Artillery is one of those groups that somebody needs to write something about. I grew up with a lot of people who reenacted in the Marion Light Artillery, and I'm sure there are a lot of stuff floating out there. So, hey, if you're listening and I can help, shoot me a note. Would love to help with that. We're going to move on to the Battle of Murfreesboro, which some folks call the Battle of Stones River, fought the end of December 1862 and 1st of January 1863. The Robertson's Florida Battery is in Polk's Corps and Withers Division of Dee's Brigade. And then in Hardee's Corps, Breckinridge Divisions, Preston's Brigade, we find the 1st/3rd Florida and 4th Florida. Those two, we'll consider the 1st and the 3rd Florida one regiment, because they were consolidated about the time of this battle took place. I think you posted that picture of that flag, the 1st and 3rd's flag, a couple of days ago. That flag, that's an interesting flag. A lot of debate about when that flag was made. A lot of folks feel that it's a little bit of a post-war flag because it's got all those different battles and everything on it. So, but that's a debate. But the 1st and 3rd Florida, 4th and 4th Florida are in Hardee's Corps. no relationship to me, at least on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. And they are in Breckinridge Division. Chickamauga fought in September of 1863. One of the real only victories the Army of Tennessee had. We have, once again, the 1st and 3rd Florida and the 4th Florida are in D.H. Hill's Corps and Stovall's Brigade. And then in Buckner's Corps and Triggs Brigade is the 1st Florida Cavalry dismounted, the 6th Florida, and the 7th Florida. And then McCant's Florida Battery is in Buckner's Corps. A few weeks later, we're fighting at the Battle of Chattanooga, Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga there in November of 1863. And it's at this point in time we get the official Florida Brigade in the Army of Tennessee. And it is also known as Finley's Brigade, Jesse J. Finley's Brigade. And all of those regiments that I mentioned before, the 1st and 3rd, the 4th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 1st Florida Cavalry dismounted are all in the Florida Brigade. And they will constitute that brigade. That will be their home organization for pretty much the rest of the war. That they're in that formation in Hardee's Corps during the Atlanta campaign. They are in that formation during the Tennessee campaign when Hood heads north after the evacuation of Atlanta, fights at Franklin and Spring Hill. Even though Finley has been wounded during the battles for Atlanta and no longer is in command of that group, they are still that brigade. And then they are all together again at the Battle of Bentonville, North Carolina in March of 1865. And then right after the Battle of Bentonville, before the surrender takes place, all of those regiments are consolidated into what is considered the 1st Florida Consolidated Infantry or Regiment. And when they surrender are surrendered at the Bennett Place at the end of April 1865, there are 402 men in that consolidated regiment. So on one hand, 402 men, that sounds like a lot of folks, but, had that brigade been at full strength, that would have been about 6,000 men that they should have had, but there were 402 who surrendered. They were placed under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Elisha Mashburn at that point in time when they were consolidated. He actually commands Finley's Brigade during the Battle of Bentonville as well. So those are the Florida regiments that serve in the Army of Tennessee. And we've briefly mentioned the Florida regiments, and we'll probably come back and talk about them at a later point, that served in the Army of Northern Virginia, the 2nd, the 5th, the 8th, and then later the 10th and the 11th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. But that's a whole nother story. So who was Jesse J. Finley? That is a fantastic question. He was the only official commander of the Florida Brigade. He was born near Lebanon, Tennessee, served in the Second Seminole Indian War. He then studied law. He lived in Arkansas. He was in the Arkansas State Senate. Then he moved to Memphis. He was the mayor of Memphis. Would not he be disappointed in Memphis today? Great question. Who's not disappointed in Memphis, Tennessee these days? And then he moves to Marianna, Florida in November of 1946. So just over a year after Florida statehood. Florida becomes a state on March 3rd of 1945. Moves to Florida, serves in the Florida Senate in 1850, and then he was a member of the Whig Party in the early 1850s. I wonder if he met Abraham Lincoln.
Probably.
Interesting question to explore. On May 1st of 1853, he is appointed a judge for the Western Judicial District of Florida, and he holds that position from 1853 to 1861. The war comes, and Finley is actually appointed a judge for the Confederate States District Court. That's a conversation we don't ever have. I wrote a blog post a while back about why we never got a Supreme Court in the Confederate government. Confederate States never actually passed that bill even though Jefferson Davis wanted it. Never actually passed that bill to actually organize the Supreme Court. But we did have district courts, and Finley is a judge in the District Court of Florida from 1861, and he resigned in March of 1862 to enlist as a private in the 6th Florida Infantry. He eventually becomes colonel of the 6th Florida Infantry and fights there in the Kentucky campaign, and eventually is promoted to brigadier general. In November of 1863, he was wounded at the Battle of Resaca, and then he is wounded at the Battle of Jonesboro, and he is out on medical leave toward the end of the war. He's trying to make his way back to his brigade, but the Federals are in between him and where he is headed, and he eventually winds up with Hal Cobb and surrenders in Columbus, Georgia. After the war is over, Finley goes on to serve in the U.S. House. He was in the 44th, the 45th, and the 47th Congress, and he dies on November 6, 1904, and is buried at Evergreen Cemetery in Gainesville. I've been to his grave. It's been years, but always someplace we many times would take a day and go to Micanopy and Gainesville, and just lots of great history up here, up there, down there in that area. When you live where I live, a lot of places are down there. So there are, as I said, a lot of those regiments. I've known folks who have reenacted those regiments for years, Company K of the 7th and the Marion Light Artillery, and just all kinds of great folks. But as far as being able, and there are rosters, Broadfoot published rosters on those regiments years ago. Probably go check them out in your local library, in your local history room or Florida room. But trying to piece together a complete history is a challenge, an absolute challenge. I'll be honest. A lot of work there to do for some enterprising young or old person.
Well, Michael, I think this is the what you were talking about. Ready. There we go.
Yep. So there's a good chance that flag right there is post-war.
Oh, okay.
Because A, it's silk, and B, it's got all the battles through Atlanta on it. Mm-hmm. And I know some folks will disagree with that, and the debate is ongoing. But that's probably a post-war veterans organization or something flag, because that does not resemble the standard Army of Tennessee battle flags. Vaguely resembles the Army of Tennessee battle flags, the issued flags. Mm-hmm. But it's probably a ever so slightly post-war flag.
Yeah, because I found that one, and I think. Oh, sorry.
I don't think that's it. Thanksgiving was a Yankee holiday.
Well, it all depends on how you look at it and which side of the argument you're on.
Jefferson Davis had frequent proclamations of days of prayer and fasting and Thanksgiving. But it's really the North that really come out and say, this is the day. And
yep. Yeah, because there's arguments. The first Thanksgiving was in Plymouth.
That's right. Or it was in Virginia.
St. Augustine.
Yeah. So
Guys,
it was really the North that pushed us to having an official Thanksgiving holiday.
Gotcha.
So I'll leave it there. History has a lot of gray areas, and I don't say that because I love Confederate history. I'll just say that, history has a whole lot of gray areas to it.
Mm-hmm. Guys, anybody have any questions for Michael? He can continue on in his discussion.
Days. So if you come to my Sunday night history chat, you know that I'm always open to questions, and if I don't have the answer, I'll probably research it out and write about it. on my blog. You can check out my blog, Looking for the Confederate War. All kinds of good stuff up there. Absolutely love talking about Confederate history. And, we could spend an entire episode on just one of these regiments or the brigade at each of these battles. I mean, there's just so much to talk about as the battles wane and are fought, and some won. Unfortunately, not enough of them won in the Western Theater of the War. The Army of Tennessee did not have the winning record.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to say because a lot of my ancestors were in the Army of Tennessee.
Same here.
Virginia or Alabama regiments in Tennessee, and have one in the Georgia artillery company. That my great uncle, who was in an Alabama regiment, and then after that regiment was surrendered at Vicksburg, didn't go back to his regiment, wound up in the 11th Florida. He actually moved to Texas after the war.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing is, I was doing research on one of mine. He left Virginia and took the long way into Texas, and he settled right down the Oklahoma and Texas state line.
Mm-hmm.
He did it to avoid war crimes.
Well,
according to the article I found on him.
Well, I'll say two things. A, you can't believe everything you read. And B, there's probably more truth there. Probably more to that story than we know.
Well, he did ride with Mosby.
I understand. I actually, to chase that rabbit for a minute, I actually have an ancestor who was born in Edgefield District, South Carolina, and fought in the Mexican-American War. And his name was John Joel Glanton. He was a very famous Apache scalp hunter. And he actually caused a war between the Apache and the United States.
Whoa.
So, and then he got scalped.
Whoa.
He was one of my great uncles. I think fourth great uncle or something. Mm-hmm. I'd have to go back and look that up to be sure. Third great uncle or something. So we all have interesting people in our family tree.
Exactly. And, one area, a good friend of mine, Ronnie, he's with the Kirby Smith camp. Mm-hmm. His dad is from Addison, South Carolina.
Right.
And he's been filling me in on stuff on my ancestors that settled in that area.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know. I had no clue one of them owned a plantation there at one time.
Yep. History is fascinating, and there's so much that it can teach us if we get out and look. Mm-hmm. If we turn off the TV and open a book and dig deep, and there's so much to learn, so much that is out there. And I'm by no means an expert, but I mean, I dig every single day, and I learn stuff almost every single day. So fascinating stuff.
Oh yeah, it is. Once you start diving into it and you follow that rabbit hole, mm-hmm. and it leads to another one in that. It's amazing what you can find. Now we talked a little bit earlier. What's the latest book that you wrote?
I've been, COVID kind of all messed us up, and publishers didn't want to publish stuff, especially concerning the 1860s, because we couldn't get out and sell it and talk to people because nothing was open. So the last 1860s book I wrote is actually called Feeding the Army of Northern Virginia. And it looks at foodstuffs and the way that food affected the Army and its outcome on the war. And that's hopefully will be out this fall. I've been writing a little local history for my area here in North Carolina and Western North Carolina. just because it's easy for me to sell that out of the trunk of my car. But I'm working now on a new book about the Battle of Plymouth, North Carolina. That was fought in April of 1864. And the most interesting thing about that battle, it is one of the few, to be honest, the only one that I know of right this minute, successful combined Army and Navy actions fought by the Confederate government. Robert F. Hoke had command of 3 infantry brigades and several artillery batteries, and he attacked Plymouth. And the day after he started his attack, the CSS Albemarle, an ironclad that was actually built in a cornfield, sailed down the Roanoke River and sunk a Federal ship and caused the other Federal ships in the river to disengage and move back down the river. And with the help of the ironclad, the Confederates, once again, one of those really complete Confederate victories, they captured almost the entire Federal force, killed, wounded, or captured. The only folks that really escaped on the Federal side, the only military personnel, were the ones on those other gunboats that sailed back down the river. So that's what I've been researching pretty hard since the first of the year. Fascinating little battle and account. And
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. Now, like you said, you're still researching it.
yeah.
But how do they coordinate between the Navy and the Army?
Well, that's a fantastic question. Hoke, at that point in time, General Hoke, was at a place we call Little Washington, Washington, North Carolina, but we call it Little Washington as opposed to Big Washington. And Hoke actually left his forces there and went and talked to the commander of the ironclad and convinced him, because the ironclad wasn't really done yet, to help with this attack. And they literally loaded forages up on the deck of the ironclad and sailed down the Roanoke River, working on the ship as they went along. And once they got a couple of miles above the Federal fortifications, they stopped and got all the blacksmiths and the other folks, the laborers, off the ship. And they were about a day late. Hoke wanted them there on the 18th, and they did not arrive until the 19th. And as far as other communications, when the battle is actually going on, I hadn't found that yet. Maybe I will.
That'd be interesting
It would be.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I know the Federal forces, there was one Federal fort that was about a mile up the river from where the main fortifications in Plymouth were. And when the main fortifications in Plymouth fell or were captured, the Federal commander in Plymouth actually used signal flags to tell the other Federal soldiers in that other fort to surrender. So there's a lot of interesting little parts. It's not a very big battle. We're talking less than 20,000 men engaged. But I kind of like the little stories. We've done Gettysburg to death. I mean, there are new books on Gettysburg that come out every month, and I've probably got 60 books on Gettysburg over there myself. And I seldom buy. The book on Gettysburg I don't have that just came out that I want is about the southern front of Gettysburg, which deals with that area in between Richmond and DC.
Oh,
But
okay.
while Lee is marching north to Virginia, you have this whole other action going on down there. I'm interested in that book, but as far as the rest of it, I mean, we need to write about some of these other smaller battles and events, like Florida and their regiments.
Yeah. Good friend of mine, and I've learned a lot from him. And through him, I've met descendants of the Cow Cavalry.
Yeah.
You know, that was a big thing in my area, and
Very big thing. Yep.
yeah, I love going out to the pioneer museums in my area and talk with them and having discussions about the cow cavalry.
Mhm. And so many people in Florida, um, when I meet people up here from Florida and they say they're from Florida, and I can tell they're not from Florida, um, but I ask them, "Well, where are you really from?" Because very few people I encounter here in Western North Carolina that say they're from Florida are from Florida. We call them halfbacks because they're only half the way back from wherever it is up north that they came. Um, but you know, so many people in Florida or here or wherever have no idea of that aspect of the history. Florida was a mosquito infested swamp, still is, but um, most people don't know that history. They don't know all the skirmishes that were fought, up and down both coasts, the salt raids, the fortifications, all of the forts. I mean, Florida had more forts, masonry forts,
Mhm.
uh, than any other state. Didn't know
Eh,
the war almost started in Pensacola. You know, um, Most folks are pretty uninformed or ill-informed regarding those aspects of history of the war. Even folks who study the war don't really know things like that.
yeah, and it surprised me. Uh, I was talking with a guy today, and it surprised me. He's lived here 15 years and don't know squat about local history.
Yeah. Well, I encounter people like that all the time.
Yeah,
And it just, not everybody has to be passionate about local history, um, but you at least need to have some idea. I can't go any place and not wonder what happened there, whether I'm down there with y'all or with my mom and dad, or, I'm here or with my wife's folks in Kentucky.
mhm.
I drive by an intersection and want to know, well, what happened here? What skirmish was fought here? Whose store was here? But I think some of us are just obsessed that way.
It, yeah, you pretty much hit hit the nail right there because this past Sunday, me and a good friend of mine, Leon Arthur, we went throughout DeSoto County and went flagging,
Mhm.
flagging Confederate graves, and he would stop and show me the historical markers,
Right.
uh, like the uh, brain fart. Yeah, it showed me an area that was the first county seat
Mhm.
before DeSoto County was actually DeSoto County.
Mhm. It's amazing, and I regret that more people are not interested. I regret we don't teach our kids. Um, I kind of gave up on the school system a long time ago, but at the same time, we were at a living history this past weekend, and it was cold, rainy, cold. Um, but we still had about at least the Park Service said at least 250 people
Wow.
come through our areas. We were in cabins. That's and a lot of them had kids. In fact, we had one family that had 9 kids. That was a lot of people to put in our little cabin. But there are people out there who do care, and I'm grateful that you have programs like this and other folks do that we can get on and try and share some of that history, whether you're watching live right now or you're catching us on the flip side later on.
Yeah.
Maybe sharing a little of that history. And if you are interested, reach out to folks. I guarantee you there's somebody out there who wants to share what they know.
Yeah. There's a enough between the within Florida, the SCV and the OCR that a lot of people would love to show you their area.
Yeah.
Like Jeff Kahn just said, 10 years ago, we were at a school all the time teaching history.
And that's correct. And,
Yeah.
I used to have to turn down schools, because the 1860s, everybody would hit that within a 2 or 3 week span. And there were more schools than we could physically get to do interpretive programs. And it's not like that now. The homeschool groups and the private school, and some of y'all live in much more populated places than I do. But that's basically it. Now, when it comes to school groups, and some people still manage to get in their local schools, we even struggle. I was on the board of our local history museum for years, and we had a couple of teachers in all of our county schools that would bring their kids to the museum. And I literally told teachers, if you can't come, if you don't want to do the paperwork, I understand. Call me, shoot me a note. I will load my truck up full of stuff and bring it to your classroom.
Mhm.
They're not interested.
Yeah. I mean, because there's a school right down the road from me. A lot of us local reenactors and SCV would go and do a presentation for them.
Yeah.
The whole, we would be outside, tent set up, displays, and all that. Each class came out. That's gone.
Yep. Absolutely gone. And it's not like they don't want us because of what we portray. It's all aspects of history. Because I could talk about any aspect of local history. I mean, I've just absorbed or marinated in local history, but they're not interested.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Nope.
Because I remember growing up back in the 70s and 80s, the local schools here would talk about local history.
Yeah. We don't do that anymore.
No.
Sure don't. And that's because the teachers don't know. That's part of it. But I could beat that horse for a long time.
Yeah.
So if you're a local teacher and you're interested, no matter where you're watching from, drop us a note. And if me or Sean don't live in your area, we could try and put you in touch with someone who can help, who does live in your area, that is interested.
And if you wanted to check out Michael's website, it's scrolling at the bottom. You can get more information about him and the books that he has written.
Sounds good, my friend.
Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention this earlier, and I know Roy and Linda are probably going to smack me around because I didn't mention it. If you're in the Florida Mechanized Cavalry, there's a ride coming up in March. If you're not on Roy Hudson or David King's email list, please let them know. That way they can communicate with you with upcoming rides and events. Michael, it's always a pleasure for you coming on. Does anybody have any questions for Michael before we end the show? Thank you, Jeff, for that. Jeff Cotton said, "Great show tonight." Don't know if you see that or not.
I can see it. I figured out that button.
All right, guys, girls, ask questions. Okay, if we don't have any questions or anything from Michael, so do you want it, Michael? Thank you for coming on tonight and spreading your knowledge.
Thank you. It's always an honor and a privilege.
Always. with that being said, guys, I'm going to end the show on one of the things from the faces of the SCV. With that being said, stay Southern, and I hope you enjoyed tonight. All right, which one do I want to go with? I'm going to do one with Carter Bond on it. I'm sure he's going to message me later.
When my mother was in college, she danced with Confederate veterans. To me, it wasn't that far away. You know, my father knew this. My mother knew this. Almost 50 years ago, I joined the Sons of Confederate Veterans. In those days, we weren't concerned about saving monuments or any of those things. That wasn't necessary. In fact, none of us had any remote idea that it would ever come up. We can't just sit there and react. We have to be proactive. Or, as Robert E. Lee said, the best way to disrupt your enemy's plans is to strike first. Everyone should do all in his power to collect and disseminate the truth, in the hope that it may find a place in history and descend to posterity. History is not the relation of campaigns and battles and generals or other individuals, but that which shows the principles for which the South contended and which justified her struggle for those principles. If you're looking for some place to be where you think you're going to accomplish something to save our history, go to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I'm Thomas Lee Jesse. I'm a descendant of Private Daughtery Gilmer, a Confederate veteran.
Thank you all for joining the show tonight. Stay Southern, and don't let the buggers grind you down. Have fun. Thank you for joining.